constitutes a high-road employer? What are the types of practices and internal policies that those companies have embedded in their operations? And because of that, the types of successes that they're realizing, financial successes, happier employees, lower turnover, and better positioning in the market. So today we're launching those, and we can tell you more about them. Julia Watts. Julia, why don't you stand up there? Julia is helping direct this project for us, and we can talk more about that. But so I just wanted to mention that, and James, I'll turn it over to you, and thank you for moderating the session.
Thanks very much. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks to our panelists. So I am a journalist. I work for the Atlantic magazine. I want to spend a minute explaining why I was so interested to join this panel, especially today when national politics can be somewhat dispiriting, and we have one more man of that type of seeming work, because I think many of the trends that people will look back on our era to see how we handle are the ones that the ASBC has been dealing with in this panel in particular. It does seem to me that we can think of ourselves usefully as being in a second Gilded Age in the United States, where all of the positive aspects and all the challenges of the 1880s, 1890s we're feeling again, from technological disruption to changes in the workplace, to environmental screenings, to connections of international migration patterns and all the rest. We know that 100+ years ago, people came up with solutions to those, so in fits and starts from the Teddy Roosevelt era through the Franklin Roosevelt era. So we're hoping that people like these panelists and like all of you are coming up with some of the answers to them. We're going to talk about one particular aspect. Last year, I got to spend a long time with Al Gore and his colleagues in the Generation Investment Corporation, trying to hear their argument for what they called long-term greed, of trying to have sustainability practices, environmental management, and human management, and all the rest. They thought the capital markets penalized in the short run, but would reward in the longer run. We know that's part of the solution, and government responses, government guidance, government regulation, government incentives, historically have been also part of the responses, and so the combination of those is what people like you and people like our three panelists in their respective roles are working out. I hope by the end of the time, we'll end just a little before noon. Before we end, we'll have 15 or 20 minutes for your questions and discussions from the floor. And by the end of this whole period, I hope we'll have discovered both what's working from the companies and government organizations represented here, what's been surprising, what's been challenging, but also then what can happen next to try to use the leverage of these companies, the leverage of the government, the leverage of this organization to bring these practices to broader application and mean that this part of the second Gilded Age puzzle is being worked out. So because I think you know all of our panelists, and because their backgrounds are printed out for you in the program, I'll just introduce them by title and explain the plan for the next few minutes. First, I'm going to ask each of them what they're actually doing, how these sorts of high-road business practices and human management practices have worked in their company, what it means to have this high-road approach in their companies. And after we go through that, talking about how the government is involved as well, we'll talk about discoveries, challenges, unexpected pitfalls, lessons, and then we'll go on from there as the discussion begins. So I'm going to start with Amy Hall, immediately to my left, from Eileen Fisher, who is Director of Social Consciousness there. Of course, your industry has been historically, from the first Gilded Age onward, has been involved in questions of how workers are treated, how they're represented, how they're paid, et cetera, et cetera. Tell us, for Eileen Fisher, what this high road policy means, what you've done, why it matters.
All right, thank you very much. So many people may know that Eileen Fisher is known for its values. We have been blessed to have a visionary leader who founded the company with a very strong commitment to employees. She's always said, for the 32 years that we've been in existence, if you get the people and the product right, the rest will fall into place. And the rest for her has always been profitability. And I have to say that that's been true. We are consistently profitable all these years. And we have always paid great attention to how we care for employees. We have a wellness program. We've had it in place for as long as I've been with the company, 23 years. Our wellness leader just took a seat. Wave your hand, Leslie. we have profit sharing. We've had profit sharing since as long as I can remember. 10% of our profits are shared, are distributed among all employees. We are 40% employee-owned, which may come as a surprise to a lot of people. Eileen's been approached at least twice, maybe more, to sell the company over the years, and she's never been interested because for her, it's not about making the company bigger or more profitable. It's about making it as strong and as values-based as it possibly can for the benefit of the employees and for the benefit of their customers. And now we have new goals that put into place similar aspirations for our supply chain, 22% of which is in the United States. So we have a lot at stake. It goes well beyond the 1,200 employees of our immediate company, but extends to employees of the suppliers we use in New York, in California, and beyond.
So let me ask you just one follow-up question before turning to Kelly, which is, does it work? You stressed that this is a company founded in the relatively recent past by one visionary leader, has unusual ownership structure, having 40% employee-owned. Does it require that kind of structural insulation from financial markets to do the kinds of things you're doing?
Well, you know, we've only been employee-owned for about 8 or 9 years now, and we've had these values long before. So I wouldn't say that the structure in itself is required to have the kind of workplace that we have. It comes from a place of compassion and a place of living in the shoes of every employee in the company and really understanding what his or her needs are. We're 80% women, by the way, so, and Eileen obviously is a woman and she has a family and she knows what it's like. So I think that is where it comes from for her and why it's been possible. It doesn't help to have a great product that sells so we can have the money to reinvest.
A personal, goods and bads from my family's point of view. My wife's cousin is named Eileen Fisher. So the personal life is, no, I'm not that Eileen Fisher, but still we like, buy, and support, and buy our products. So now Kelly Vlahakis, from the President and CEO of Earth Friendly Products. Your company has been it's known for specialty in environmental sustainability practices. Tell us how that also spills over into your human practices.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, James. So our company will celebrate our 50th anniversary next year. We were started in 1967 by my father, Van Vlahakis, and he was a great visionary, a great pioneer. And for those of you who don't know his story, he came to this country in the 1950s, didn't speak the English language, lived in homeless shelters, went on to study chemistry at Roosevelt University because of the Greek root words, and started our company in his garage. And so my father really believed wholeheartedly and really both environmental responsibility and in social responsibility. So for the last 50 years, we've been practicing a lot of these very tenets that ASBC has laid out in their high road employer philosophy and practices. And I just thought I'd share, you know, there's 10 different policies that the ASBC has put into place, and I thought I'd share some of the ways in which our company follows these policies and how these policies really have been beneficial financially to our company as well. And I think, you know, one of the great players in this room that really talks about the business case of these things is Business for a Fair Minimum Wage. And so I know we have Holly Sklar and Alyssa both here today, and maybe you guys want to put your hands up, but I would encourage, I really thank them for all the work that they're doing, because we certainly want to serve as a business model and a role model, and it's great to have that vehicle to articulate our message to the media and to the wider audience, that in the long run, it's profitable to implement these practices. So on living wage, first I'll talk about that. At Earth Friendly Products, our minimum wage is $17 an hour. And we made our minimum living wage at $17 back in April of 2014. Prior to that, we were at $15 an hour. And it makes sense. We've had a lot of operational profitability by doing this. Our employees stay with us. They stay with us for the long run. If you come and visit any of our facilities, We have manufacturing facilities all across the United States. You'll see that we have such long-term employees, 30 years, 40 years, people who work with their families. And it's because our employees really are committed to our company. I think a lot of people look for compliance, but we're really looking for a commitment, a sense of ownership, and being part of the fabric of our firm. When we increased our minimum wage to $17 an hour, we saw an increase in productivity. We saw a decrease in voluntary turnover, the retention of corporate memory, the decrease in training costs and recruiting costs, and so many other things that I really don't think businesses look at long term. So they look at these current tangible costs and they forget the big picture. And so I really encourage them to do that. So living wage is one of the areas. The second area that ASBC has articulated is family-friendly benefits. And so at Earth Friendly Products, all of our employees have a PPO insurance, so they can see their preferred healthcare providers. We want them to be able to see the doctors that they want to see and they trust. We want our team members to be healthier and happier. It benefits the company as well. And a lot of other benefits like paid life insurance, paid leave. This is very important. Paid paternity and paid maternity also vacation, anywhere from 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, depending on how long you've been with the firm. Paid personal time off, paid sick leave. Green incentives for our employees. So if our employees want to get a green vehicle, making sure we have an incentive and a bonus structure so that they can do that. $2,500 for that. If they want to put solar panels on their rooftop, if they relocate and they live in closer proximity to our facilities, there's bonuses for all of those as well. Wellness programs as well, as Amy spoke about. That's also very important. So making sure that we're really doing a lot of the teaching and the training and the education, because ultimately our employees are our greatest brand ambassadors. They're going out into the world and they're caring and they're communicating our message of health and wellness. So making sure that they're informed, that they can share that with their families. So having seminars on site about healthy eating, doing all sorts of wellness screening, so in case there's an issue, they can address those things. Stress
Sure, how about one other highlight?
Okay, so one other highlight. Obviously, I'd be remiss if I didn't, talk about all of the different sustainability initiatives we have in place, because that's another one of the tenets that ASBC lays out. I've got our Vice President of Sustainability and Education, Dr. Moderator, here in the audience with me. And under her leadership and dedication, we've achieved zero waste, platinum zero waste in all of our manufacturing facilities. We are carbon neutral, and we also are water neutral as of August of 2016. So it's the first time a company has achieved all three of these, this trifecta, and that's also very important to us as well.
Great, and every item on your list is one we want to study, and so it's great to have this introduction to them. Now I'd like to turn to Chris Lowe, who's the Deputy Secretary of Labor with experience in all surprisingly wide range of government service over your tenured years. You've heard from two private corporations about personal vision, about unusual financial structure, about arguments for long-term profitability of these approaches. What do you think? How does the government view initiatives like this? What can you do to support them? How can you broaden the impact? What's the government's role in this discussion?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you for having me. It's, I think, my third time being in front of all of you. This is one of my favorite organizations. We are committed to helping to push worker-friendly policies at the state, local, national, and international level. So, we've made a commitment to push for an increase in the minimum wage, for paid sick leave, paid family leave through federal legislation. Obviously, given the makeup of Congress right now, that is challenging. So, Tom Perez, my boss, and I spend a good chunk of our time on the road, and we go to the reddest of red states and the bluest of blue states to advocate for state and local policies. I had been everywhere from Montpelier, Vermont, pushing for paid sick leave, which got signed, to Birmingham, Alabama, which was increasing the minimum wage, and they got pretty far until the state preempted them. I'm in Seattle on Thursday, where there's a ballot initiative on the minimum wage. The mayor will also sign a new city ordinance on scheduling practices as well. But our reach also extends beyond the borders of this country. Last week I was at Coke headquarters in Atlanta, which was doing a big corporate responsibility conference about how major multinational companies can work on improving their supply chains, particularly as it relates to worker rights. So, we are obviously are all in terms of pushing for legislation, but one of the things we also do is spend a lot of time with high-road employers and helping them to lift up their practices and telling the story about why long-termism makes sense and why, when you invest in your workers, that's the best investment you can make. It's hiring better people, it's retaining better people, it's better quality services for customers. And so we are really trying, and not to be put off by inertia here at the federal level.
And to ask one follow-up about that, you say you deal with employers. Over the last decade or so, as national politics generally has become more polarized, and people sort of less willing to listen to arguments from the other side, what's your experience with employers? Are they increasing their willingness to hear these arguments? Is it static? How has that changed? I know you haven't been there that whole time.
No, when you talk to individual employers, they will tell you that the most important investment that they make is in their workers. Everybody gets that. Now, I'm not sure that necessarily gets represented through the positions that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce takes, which is sort of ironic because most of their members, all of their members, probably provide wages significantly higher than minimum wage, have basically. And so I think what you often see in Washington is a reflexive opposition to a lot of these policies. But when you go out, particularly in an economic climate when you have 4.9% unemployment, you have to treat your workers because you are hiring in a very competitive atmosphere. I would also say in terms of international labor rights, companies are very concerned about their brands. And with the internet, when anyone can get online and find out where you source that t-shirt from or where you source the raw material from, customers want to spend their money with companies that are trying to do the right thing. And so I think that there is a growing awareness that's both it's based in moral principles, but I think it's also smart economic principles as well.
And again, have one confirming personal anecdote before we segue to the next round of questions. For the last couple of years, my wife and I on a project for the Atlantic have been going around to smaller cities around the United States that have been economically distressed in some way and how they've recovered. And we've seen something very similar to what you're describing. For example, we were in western Kansas in Dodge City and Garden City recently. Very, very politically conservative areas, and yet very concerned locally about worker rights in the meatpacking industries and taking care of the refugee kids and all the rest. So if you look at the U.S. at that textural level, it's more encouraging than some others. The next round of questions, again, in the same order, will be about surprises, discoveries, lessons you have learned from your experience. So obvious when you started out that you think can be part of a broadening nationally the impact of these high-road businesses. So maybe from Eileen Fisher's point of view, were there any blind alleys, any difficulties, any things that were surprisingly either difficult to implement or surprisingly easy to implement?
Well, I'll just start by saying that we're always on the journey. I feel like much of what we do is an experiment, and some of it works and some of it doesn't. A couple of things that come to mind right off the bat. Earlier this year, we had to discontinue part-time healthcare for our part-time retail store employees. That's how I would express it. And obviously, that didn't come. That was not welcomed. We lost some people who were very disillusioned by that. It was simply too expensive for us, given the number of people we have at that level of employment. And so we're switching now to kind of a menu of healthcare. We're going to be rolling that out beginning 2017, and we're all being educated on that internally. So that was something that I think was a reality check for us. We really strive to do the right thing. We try to be as generous as we can, and it isn't always possible. Trying to think of something else that is an example of...
Or something where you thought it was going to be a challenge, but it was pushing on an open door. We can come back.
Well, you know what? For me personally, I have a lot of pride in this. Earlier this year, we became a certified B Corporation, and that meant that we achieved a threshold. We were able to demonstrate that we have achieved a certain minimum performance in terms of our governance, in terms of how we integrate, engage with our community, our supply chain, our employees, etc. And although we did pass, we barely passed. I think you need a minimum score of 80. We got about an 81 out of 200. So we have our work cut out for us, but we're finally in, and we're excited to be on the journey now.
Congratulations. So Kelly, in your company, again, what have been the surprising either victories or challenges and lessons you draw from them more broadly?
Well, I think the victories, as I had kind of mentioned before, is just the tremendous financial benefits of really implementing these practices, right? The increased productivity and the increased employee morale. I mean, those are the great victories. But there were challenges as well. And one of the challenges that, really we faced was the fact that when you raise the minimum, it obviously disrupts the wage hierarchy. And so suddenly you have employees that have been with you for some time and are making the same amount of money as a newcomer. And so in dealing with that, we realized there had to be a lot of education around that. We needed to make sure that every single employee understood our mission and our vision, that it was clearly communicated why we were doing this. We wanted to make sure that everybody understood the increase in cost of living so that people could be really informed as to why over the years we were continually raising the floor, right? I said in 2014 we went to 17, in 2012 we went to 15, in 2010 we went to 13, so there was this constant increase. And so just really making sure that everyone at the table, all of the stakeholders understood. We did have to shift as well some of the employees that were at that $17 an hour level upwards to account for rising the floor. But we really wanted them to have an understanding of our greater goal. And so I think people do have to be aware of that shift in wage hierarchy and how, longtime employees can then feel devalued if you're not really clearly communicating the reasons behind taking this important stand.
And Amy mentioned that Eileen Fisher had to back off a certain kind of health benefits for part-time workers. Are there high road steps you've had to back off from because they just didn't work out the way you expected?
I'm really fortunate to say that right now the policies we've had in place we've been able to maintain and expand upon, so we haven't had to back off of anything per se. A lot of it was just about finding different avenues and different ways to implement these things. And certainly I can tell you that there were a lot of members on our team that had wanted me to back off of the $17 an hour, that had really pushed for that. And obviously, the initial financial cost of doing so. But we're also as a company taking a look at, the multiple between the highest earners and the lowest and keeping that compacted as well so that we can have more, money to do these types of programs.
So, Chris, your role in this round is from the government's point of view, either incentives, penalties, guidance, exhortation. What are either surprising successes, surprising pitfalls? What have you learned from the government?
Yeah, I was going to address challenges as well. I think one of the challenges that we have faced is a lack of data. When I talk to employers, they tell me when you pay higher wages, you attract a better workforce, you're able to retain them. Or when you have paid sick leave, paid family leave policies, your ability to retain women of working of childbearing age goes up, and actually, frankly, fathers as well. There is a surprising lack of data on that. And so as we are trying to make the business case to other employers that these policies make sense, it is true that some of these policies will cost you more upfront, but you will reap the benefits at the back end. And there's just not that much data on there. And it's one of the reasons why we at the Department of Labor, in particular around paid leave, are commissioning some data, some research in that area. I think the second challenge we have is that as we are out in the field lifting up sustainable businesses, as we are supporting state and local initiatives around some of these policies, reflexively we hear business community opposes it. And when I meet with businesses, I meet with plenty of businesses who say these actually make a lot of sense. But there's this reflexive, and maybe it's the businesses that belong to the local Chamber of Commerce that are opposing it. There's another side of the business story that is often not told as part of that. So I think those are two big challenges: lack of data and always going into places and being faced with a reflexive business opposition, even when that's actually not the case on the ground.
And to follow up about your data surveys, are these surveys where you think you know what the answer is, you just want to substantiate it, or you really don't know what the underlying?
No, I think we know it. I mean, we've had, and when we do these roundtables, I was up in Boston pushing paid family leave, and we had, one of Google's HR people. Google will tell you that when they increase the amount of paid family leave, the loss of workers, of women, basically dropped to zero. And so, but how you substantiate that, quantify that in a way, because yes, when you provide more family leave, there is a cost. And how you understand what the benefits are is harder and harder. And I think as we wrap all this together, one of the biggest challenges we face is obviously when it's a publicly held company that has to report on a quarterly basis. You're always concerned about your bottom line for that quarter, and it's harder to make the business case that these are longer-term benefits along the way.
I'm going to come back to that, and I first want to give both Amy and Kelly a chance to ask Chris a question. From your point of view as trying to run these high-road businesses, what would you like the Department of Labor or the federal government to do differently than what it does now? You be limited to the realm of sustainable business, but is there something the Department of Labor can be doing differently that would make your life easier now?
Sure. Well, there's several different programs that we take advantage of and work with, and workforce training programs and other things. And so I'd like to see what can the Department of Labor really do for businesses like ours that stay in the United States and manufacture in the United States. And, there's this domestic production credit that you can get, or the research and development credit that you can take. But any other ways that you can really support businesses like ours that are really trying to lead the way on these initiatives, training grants and other things that you could do for us?
It's a great question. One of the changes that we have made over the last couple of years is revamp our training programs. We call it job-driven training, which essentially means we should actually be training people for jobs that exist versus what we used to call train and pray, where we train people and pray they got the jobs. And it's one of the reasons why in all of our grant applications now for training money, it has to be a coalition of partners. It's not only the local workforce system, it has to be community colleges, it has to be industry stakeholders. And what we're really trying to do is ensure that our needs, you should, in your local areas, your workforce development folks should be tightly synced up with your economic development folks. It does not make sense to have a bifurcated system. So we are trying to move more in that direction. There's a brand new legislation that we are implementing right now, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, that will really codify a lot of those partnerships and collaborations along the way. Because you're right, we don't have all the training dollars. Most of the training dollars in this country are still going out from companies themselves. But to the extent that we have those training dollars, billions of dollars, they ought to be going to serve the needs, not only of workers, but of employers as well.
Give you your chance.
So I'm going to respond to something you said earlier, which was about the data point. We have a supplier in California that, because of the recent rise in the minimum wage in California, they actually had to lay off a number of workers, which was really heartbreaking for me because I'm such a strong proponent of a higher minimum wage at the federal level. And so what comes up for me is how can the Department of Labor partner more strongly, not just with the bigger companies like us, but with the kind of, the supplier level, the manufacturers in this country. They're the small mom and pop. This is very much of a mom and pop business to make it possible for them to have a taste of the high road workplace practices and not lose out in the near term, because as you said, it can take a long time to reap the benefits.
I am a full supporter of what cities and states are doing in terms of better wages and in terms of better leave policies. But I do understand that it creates a little bit of a disconnect. If you've got a city like Seattle that's got a higher minimum wage than Washington State, if you are a new employer trying to figure out where should I locate, and you have the option between inside of Seattle city limits or outside, the rational business decision would be outside. And so it's one of the reasons why, as much as we support these initiatives, we really need to increase the federal minimum wage. We really need to have federal paid leave policies because you then can even out some of these inconsistencies. Part of the problem is that in places that states and cities that don't have these policies, all all of you who are trying to do the right thing, it is economically the right thing to do, but you probably are putting yourselves at some amount of economic disadvantage to your competitors. And that's why we need to even this out, where you do what Microsoft has done, where Microsoft has said, for their contractors, you have to provide paid sick leave. And so you put everyone, you have to level the playing field for everybody.
So I'm going to ask you one more round of questions, and I'll turn it over to the audience. We've properly so far discussed a lot of granular issues of what your companies are actually doing, how the federal government can help. I'll start with Chris on this one too. I'm wondering about how you engage with the general public on the fundamental question of the business case for this kind of approach. And I'll give you this background. When I was doing this piece on Al Gore last year, I kept asking him again and again, if your approach to investment is so much more profitable, why doesn't everybody do it? And with bringing along the returns, why wasn't every other financial institution? And his argument, his answer boiled down to the fact the structural incentives are just pushed in a different way. People are rewarded on their short-term payments and everything, all the other reasons why, even though it would be more profitable in the long run, people aren't able to adjust themselves. When people come to you, for example, you mentioned just a minute ago, Chris, you thought that some high-road companies were putting themselves at a disadvantage. At the highest level, when you're out making speeches saying that the high road is the better road, how do you make the case that this is worth it for the country, for companies?
I should qualify. I don't think the high road approach put themselves at a long-term economic disadvantage. You may put yourself at a temporary short-term disadvantage. But I will say, I think we need to tell the story better. As much as I think the data helps, if you hear my speeches or Secretary Perez's speeches, we always drill down to the individual small business owner that we've met that's trying to do the right thing, or the workers that have benefited from higher wages. Because I think that's the only way you can make it impactful. I mean, one of the favorite or least favorite stories I tell all the time is when I was pushing, when I was in Philadelphia about a year and a half ago with Mayor Nutter pushing for a paid sick leave city ordinance, which did get done. I met a woman who is a wheelchair attendant at the Philadelphia International Airport. She makes a sub-minimum wage. First of all, because I did not know this, wheelchair attendants at the airports are tipped workers. I don't think most people know that, and you actually are not allowed to ask for tips. So this is a woman every day who's pushing around elderly people. She has to make a decision when she is sick. Do I go to work and potentially compromise the health of the person I'm pushing around, or do I stay at home and not get paid? And no one in this country should have to make that decision. That's not just an economic issue, that's a public health issue as well. So we at the Department of Labor try to tell that through stories in our speeches, through our blogs. We always give our Department of Labor Twitter feed or Facebook. We're always doing whatever we can to lift up these stories.
And Kelly, I'm going to put a little twist on this question before turning it to you. You've given us some illustrations of why you say your practices pay off, they're good for your company. I'm sure people around the world might say, well, how can that be? Why isn't everybody doing it if it makes so much money? So how do you answer that follow-up skeptical question?
Absolutely. Well, outside of the fact that I oftentimes talk about the operational profitability, and I really talk about all of the different data that we've seen internally, and I like to quantify that, right? 50% reduction in voluntary turnover and so forth. I also talk about the fact that it really differentiates our brand in the minds of the consumer, and that we currently have a forensic consumer who's hungry for information, who's Googling, who's searching, who's looking online, and who really wants to use their consumer dollars to vote. And that's such an important thing in this day and age, really connecting emotionally with that consumer and really making sure that they're using their dollars to support brands that are made in America, that are following ethical business practices, brands that they're proud to bring in their household and put on their countertops. And so I talk to people about the fact that it's really, grown our brand. I mean, we're now sold in 62 countries. We're sold all across the nation. We're sold not just in natural markets, but we're sold in conventional markets. The conventional retailers now are asking us about our sustainability initiatives. I mean, in 2008, Walmart held their first sustainability conference, and they laid out their 15 principles. And they said, hey, listen, we're going to make sure to support, manufacturers that are adhering to these. And so it's really interesting to see how dynamic the landscape is and changing it is. But you're really winning the hearts and the minds of those consumers as well. And you're stimulating the economy, ultimately. You're putting revenue back in the economy. Rather than putting it in a bank account, you're putting it in the consumer's hands. I want a workforce that can go into the market and buy our products and support our company. And I want to stimulate the local economies that we're in. We have no national purchasing programs, so always purchase locally. So in California, and Illinois, and New Jersey, and the state of Washington, and all of the states we reside in, we have all sorts of local partners that we're working with. So, and then you get the community really engaged. And so I try and, utilize a lot of different mediums to tell that story. I've been on Fox Business News several times, not always, and supporting, raising the wage on Fox is not always, their most favorite topic. But I think that when you can make the business case and you can really do it in different mediums and really connect with businesses, I think it's very, very important because ultimately we'll all rise together.
So Amy, your views on making this business case at the highest level that's worth having these practices?
Well, I just got our voluntary turnover rates ourselves at Eileen Fisher. This year, currently at the corporate level, 2.5%. At the retail level, 6.5%. And I'm told that in our industry, the average turnover rate at the corporate level is around 14-15%, and at the retail level is 50%. So we're doing something right from that perspective. We don't do a lot of measuring internally because we just have an intuition about what's right for our employees. Eileen just said to me a couple weeks ago, she hopes within the next year to 18 months to be able to tell a more convincing story with the data, to be able to build a business case because, like Kelly, she really believes that we have an opportunity to influence the wider, not just the apparel industry, but all business, on how to do the right thing and how to make it right for your bottom line. So I think if you came back to me in 18 months, we'd have a better answer.
So a lightning round question for each of you, just looking for a sentence or two answer. What's the main thing, I'll start with you, Chris, the main thing you'd like the people here at this conference to do next to advance? What's the single thing you'd like them either to know or to do that would make the cause of these sustainable and hybrid workplaces more feasible?
It's hard for me to advise these folks. These are all the forward-leaning people. I would say this, going back to my point about we don't hear the voice of business when we're out. I don't know if you all are involved in your local chambers of commerce. You have to get involved in your local chambers of commerce and continue to push them either to revamp their own external positions, or at least not to advance such backward-looking positions when they're talking about these issues.
Sorry.
Well, I think I would encourage you to speak to like-minded businesses, but also do the uncomfortable task of speaking to businesses that don't share these same philosophies, and really make sure to communicate the message. There's so many great businesses in the room. I see Dr. Bronner's is here and others that share our beliefs, and I think that really all of you that adhere to these principles, and I would encourage you to look at ASBC's principles that they've clearly delineated on their website, and share those with a broader audience, and have courage and be brave and stand out for what's right for our business and what's right for our economy and what's right for humankind.
I really feel like if I had to choose one issue to speak out on, it would be minimum wage, raising the federal minimum wage. Holly pointed out to me right before this session, there was an article on the front page of today's New York Times that speaks to the benefits that many lower income workers have gained from having a higher income, and very modest but substantially higher income. And I feel like we have to keep our minds, if you imagine, a metaphor that one of our consultants uses, if you imagine a rubber band, here we are, you pull that rubber band, the top of the rubber band is the vision, and the bottom of the rubber band is the reality, the current reality, and there's tension in between. We want to always aim for that vision, remember where we are, but never be happy down there. We want to close the gap. And for me, the beginning of closing that gap is raising the minimum wage so that everybody has a chance to achieve their dreams.
Thank you. So we have a few minutes for questions. Who has a question? Yes.
Hi, I'm Ida Kaufman. I have a question about, in this national picture around data and stories, reporting, and your corporate responsibility practices, how are you going to report into what are your plans in relation to the sustainable development goals and the role of business? ASBC is a member of the Global Business Alliance within that UN framework, but I'd really like to hear what you have to say. And also, from our government perspective, how does the local action of business and your reporting on that really influence our hitting our targets?
Which of our two business people would like to speak?
Okay.
Kelly.
Well, I'll just start. So, in terms of reporting, so we issue an annual sustainability report. Dr. Moderator is responsible for that report. That report is shared online on our website at ecos.com, so you can go there and read about the things that we're doing. We also supply a lot of our data to the other organizations who are working diligently with the media and other partners to share the story, and really inviting people to come into our facilities and see exactly what we're doing. So we believe wholeheartedly in transparency, and this is another important part of the picture. So certainly utilizing our website as a reference point for the information and data.
And Iva, we have not formally made a commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals. We believe that what we do does support many of them. We just have not taken the time to align back and forth what we're doing. We complete so many different kinds of reports: the HIG Index, the B Impact Assessment, the Ethical Trading Initiative annual report, that that's where we've been spending all our time. And we report on a number of things on our website, but not in a consistent way. It's again, part of our journey. I think we're going to get there fairly soon.
You know, on the transparency front, I will say it's not only businesses being more transparent about the practices, it's about government being more transparent with the data that we currently hold. You know, when you're trying to make decisions about who you want to contract with, understanding that we have data on, you know, some of these wage and hour practices, OSHA practices. We have, as a quick anecdote, every year we put out a report on child labor and forced labor around the world that not only focuses on countries, but goods that are made in those countries. We used to put it out to call it a phone book is an understatement of what a phone book looks like. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's thousands of pages long. And what we finally did last year for the first time was we made it into an app. And so you had not had time to download it. It's called Sweat and Toil. And it basically, you can look at any country around the world as well as any product and find out whether the product in that country is made with forced labor or child labor. It's a small example about how we're trying to open up our own storehouse of data that governments can use it to make sense.
I started a company when I was 20, and I'm really proud to have helped champion the high road employment practices, and I'm just a huge advocate. But I have to say, as a small business, it is not easy to do the right thing. Healthcare rates went up 20%, and for example, we had an unlimited vacation policy, and then they passed pay of leave in California, and I had to spend $1,000 to make our policy compatible with the law, add things to the pay stubs. It sounds great to do a lot of these things, and I'm always a big advocate, but it's so much easier for large business to do it and not for small business. Large business has every advantage in the United States. For example, I paid 24% effective tax rate the last 3 years. Apple paid 8%. How does small business ever become big business? And how do we not have small business feel so oppressed by these regulations that really are helping them in the long term? How do we change that?
Who has an answer for that?
I take your comments to heart, and I'm sure that there are no shortage of Department of Labor regulations that probably adversely impact small businesses. I mean, we are always concerned about, what the role of federal government is vis-a-vis small businesses and ensuring that, where appropriate, we have carve-outs, or, certainly in terms of small business contracting goals we have in the federal government, ensuring that I think we have to hit a 24% goal every year. But I'm not sure we always strike the right balance. And you're right. I mean, if you have to comply with those rules in California and you decide, hey, I want to open up another operation in Washington State, that's a whole nother series of rules that you have to comply with. Again, it's one of the reasons why we ought to standardize some of this stuff at the federal level, which makes sense. But I certainly, if, you know, when your larger competitors have the HR resources to actually easily comply. So I hear exactly, and if we believe, as I do believe, that small businesses are the, you know, growth, the engine of economic growth in this country, we have to make it much easier.
Yes. I'm so glad you made those comments because they're really important for everyone here in the room to hear. I would say that there's a lot of things that as a small business, when you implement these high road employment practices, they really do help your bottom line. So for instance, you know, I talked earlier about our insurance, right? Our PPO insurance. We too saw skyrocketing rates, and you know, we're a company of 400 people, which certainly makes us a little larger, but we're certainly not large like a lot of the conglomerates we compete against in the marketplace. And so when we put together our insurance policy, and we instituted all of these wellness programs that I had referenced before, really educating our team members, we actually had an 18% reduction in our insurance premiums. It was huge. In a time where the rates were really skyrocketing, our employees got healthier. Our employees took the time to stay home and recover from illnesses so they didn't become larger illnesses that they had to deal with later on. So there's some real immediate effects of doing some of these things that as a small business will help you as well.
So, do you want to add over? Okay. So I'm going to see, we only have a few minutes. How many people would like to ask questions? I'll take any other questions that are here. And if, yes. So we'll have, if each of you will ask your question, then we'll answer them both together. So first, if you'll give your question, then yours, then we'll answer them together.
Mitch Rofsky, Better World Club. I believe, Amy, you mentioned that 21% of your supplies come from America, from the United States. How do you screen overseas? What's going on overseas? And then I was wondering if either of you had to do with labor unions.
So overseas screening and labor, we're going to wait to get both questions. Overseas screening and labor unions, yes, thank you.
Hi, Karen Lippman from the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation. I actually have a two-part question. The first, you mentioned the green incentives for your employees, and whether there's ever been any conversation at the federal level or at any state level about making those tax exempt, as they are for health care and retirement and other benefits, including those. And the second, which goes along with that, is the employee engagement. So a lot of the practices are about supply chain and how you source your material. How are you looking at engaging your employees beyond perhaps the wellness and the sustainability benefits to get them engaged in reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, for instance?
So I'm going to ask each of you in order to deal with any assortment of these topics. So overseas screening of unions, green energy credits, employee engagement, and anything else you want to be sure people hear before you do.
Okay, overseas screening, it doesn't really pertain to the topic of this session, but I'll just quickly say that we, all of our overseas suppliers, just about all of them are very long-term, and in total, we have a total of 50 first-tier suppliers, about 8 of which are in the United States, the rest are overseas, but it's not a large number, and we really do get to know them, and so we have a certain set of standards that we impose on them, and we ask them to adhere to, and I'm happy to follow up on that. The only trade union we are involved with directly is in Italy, and we have an agreement with the apparel trade union in Italy to be a conduit between us and the various suppliers we use there. And in fact, right now we're in conversation with them about the situation that has come up, and it's going very, very well. So that happens to be the only place where we have unionized workers. And third thing, Leslie and Simone, raise your hands, because they are our sustainability ambassadors. Everyone wants to know about how we have incorporated sustainability throughout our workforce. Those two would be great to talk to.
So at first talking about the ways in which we've engaged our employees. So outside of doing these seminars and these trainings, it's also the act of participating in all of the things that we're discussing here. So at all of our manufacturing facilities, we have organic gardens, and we teach about organic gardening, and we let the employees take home all of the things that they grow in our gardens. We do all sorts of eco-science programs, so we bring in our employees and their families, and we teach about green chemistry. We teach how do you make our products? How do you find a green surfactant that comes from coconut or potato waste and beets? And how do you utilize natural essential oils and other things so that they understand exactly what they're making, so they can feel very proud about the products that they're making and that they're producing. A lot of the engagement comes around education and training and making sure everyone understands our vision. I mean, I can't say that strongly enough, that really communicating and over-communicating is an important thing to do so that everyone clearly understands it and is engaged. We have partnerships with museums in all of the cities in which we have facilities so that our employees can take their families to those museums and they can participate in all of the wonderful exhibitions we have there, whether they're eco-challenges or healthy home exhibits and things of that nature. In terms of the incentives, I think it's a great question about, having those tax credits in place and making those incentives tax exempt. We certainly would support that because we think it's important. In terms of overseas, we're sourcing almost everything locally, so we're really not getting that much overseas except for the things we can't get locally. So I can't get enough coconut oil locally. I wish I could. I hope someone starts investing in coconut plantations here in the US. That would be terrific. But when we are getting something from overseas, we have a team of people led by Dr. Moderator, that go there and they visit the site and they audit the site and we make sure that they're compliant with all of the things that we believe in. So that's very important to us.
So Chris, you have a chance to give the closing argument.
Well, I'm not trying to do the closing argument, but I am glad you mentioned employee engagement, and I think it's an important part of this. It's not only having good policies in place, it's having good culture in place. And we know this intensely at the Department of Labor. There's an annual survey of employee engagement at federal agencies. When Tom Perez and I came in, the Department of Labor was second to last in the federal government. I mean, just take it. I mean, we are the department that's supposed to watch out for workers, and we were second to last in the federal government. In 2 years, we went from number 18 to number 10 to number 8, most improved large federal agency 2 years in a row. And we did that, first of all, by examining our policies. And we realized, for instance, our workplace flexibility policies did not match what they should have been in the federal government. We weren't providing enough training and professional development opportunities. We wanted to give workers a voice, not only in terms of the external work they did, but what happened internally as well. And so it was simply a question of having an online portal where people could make suggestions, and almost like in Facebook fashion, you could sort of give a thumbs up or thumbs down to certain ideas. And they were little ideas. I mean, somebody came to me and said, why don't we have a microwave in our cafeteria? And I said, why don't we have a microwave in our cafeteria? Or why does it get so hot here at 5 o'clock? And it turned out that we had been shutting off the heat to save money. And I ran that over and said, that's just cold air conditioning. I said, that's crazy. So I think a lot, the policies matter a lot in terms of leave pay, but also making your workers feel like they have a voice in the decisions that your companies are making is critically important. And I can see that in our own organization as well.
I can't resist asking, what was the last? Was it TSA?
Actually, DHS has been last in the federal government for years and years and years. And they do a very important mission, but it's a very challenging mission. And number one, in case you care, is NASA.
So we've learned a lot that's been very interesting, at least to me, over this past hour. We've learned that these tasks, these challenges are indeed challenging. There are surprises, they require adaptability, but they are important and they can pay off. So please join me in thanking Amy.